The message this morning is on faith, and I suspect that Pastor Todd and I are not exchanging emails. I don't think I'm getting his emails, and I'm not getting his, and I don't think he's getting mine also. So there's no listing. I don't think there's any listing of what I was going to speak on this morning in the bulletin. After I had decided to talk about faith today, Cindy and I were taking a morning walk on the railroad right-of-way. During that walk, we were talking about the idea of faith and what it actually applied to. After kicking around some ideas, we agreed that the word faith was a higher level word, more profound than other words. It was a word that could not be trivialized. It was not like the word awesome, where you could have an awesome God on Sunday and an awesome chocolate fudge sundae on Wednesday. In order to understand what we are really looking at, I thought it best to go back and look at the definition. So, faith is to have confidence in a person or a thing that is not seen. Now, those are important words, not seen. However, from a Christian perspective, faith is our aligning ourselves with the ideas and examples of the life of Jesus. Without understanding who or what we believe in, there can be no faith. Therefore, we look at Scripture, tradition of the church, and our community of believers. For those of you who read the New Jersey Herald, you know that recently there were several articles about a new statue at our local pet cemetery. The statue was a copy of one on the campus of a Tokyo university and depicts a man and his dog who was a faithful companion, following his master to the train station each day and waiting until his return from the university at the end of the day. I lived in Japan with my family for 5 years when I was a young person. And during that time, one of the train stations that we would use in Tokyo had a statue of the dog waiting for its master. The original statue was just the statue of the dog sitting down outside of the train station. As you may know from reading those articles, that dog waited for many years being fed by the people who used the train station. That statue had a red cloth tied around his neck, which in Japan is a sign of veneration. The dog had become a symbol of faith and was venerated for his faithfulness. Besides Cindy, I talked with other friends about faith. Some who had lost their faith, even though they had been raised as a Methodist or a Catholic. Their faith had slipped away, and when we talked about regaining their faith, they weren't sure whether or not that would happen. In other words, they were doing little or nothing to renew their faith. There was no seek and ye shall find in their Christian lives. In my own life, there was a period of time when the idea of faith or strengthening my faith had little meaning. Of course, it was during a period when I was not going to church and was surrounded by the U.S. Navy way of life. And if any of you have been in the military, you know what military life can be like. If you're young and easily led astray. So, although I considered myself to be a Christian, I was really only half-filled Christian. Our faith is sort of like a plant. It can only live and grow if it is watered and nurtured. Unwatered, it will die. Reverend Wilson, who is one of the evangelists I heard speak this last summer when I was in northern New York, writes in his book, Filled Up and Poured Out, about a hospitalized friend who was close to dying. When visiting him in the hospital, they began to talk about faith. And his friend said that he had very little. Reverend Wilson then tore off a small piece of paper and wadded it up until it was about the size of a mustard seed. Looking at his friend, he asked if he had that much faith, and his friend replied that he thought he did. although I have never tried it, that much faith, according to the Bible, is enough to move a mountain, and that was a starting point for his friend's growth. Habakkuk. Now it's interesting. In the South, Habakkuk is pronounced Habakkuk. In the North, it's pronounced Habakkuk.
Habakkuk, that's the way I learned it.
Well, right, and I'm going to get to that later on too with Zacchaeus and Zacchaeus. Habakkuk is one of the major minor prophets that we don't know much about. In fact, he may only be mentioned one other time in the Bible, and scholars aren't even sure of that. Habakkuk in the apocryphal book, Bel and the Dragon, and I'm sure all of you have read that, was transported carrying a bowl of porridge by an angel to serve the food to Daniel when he was in the den of lions. Now that's something that's outside of our Christian tradition, but when I was younger, I read all the Apocrypha, and one of my favorite ones was Bel and the Dragon, primarily because of its title. You know, what more fascinating thing could you read for a teenager than Bel and the Dragon? When reading in the first chapter of Habakkuk, especially when we read the whole chapter, Habakkuk sounds like a man who has lost his faith. We read, quote, "Why art thou silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? Therefore the law is ignored and justice never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted." End quote. Is this a question that any one of us may ask? When I was thinking about it, when I was reading that scripture and reading about it, thinking about it, I thought, gee, would I ever confront God in that way? Would I ever say something, that confrontational to God? And I didn't think that I ever would. I can't imagine somebody doing that. But Habakkuk, in his experience of what was happening at that time, was just overwhelmed by the trauma that not only were the children of Israel experiencing, but probably he was experiencing in his own life. I would think that that sounds like much of an expression of faith in God. However, in the reading from the second chapter, we read in part, "I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me." Then God replies, "Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by faith." The righteous will live by faith. Moving on to Luke chapter 19, we once again read a story that is so familiar that we even sing a song about it. However, in the North, the ending is, "For I'm going to your house today." In the South, I lived in St. Louis for 5 years. In the South, the ending words are, "For I'm going to your house for tea." In this song, I think the South has it right. Can you just imagine sitting with Jesus on a cup of tea and talking about faith? We all know that sycamore trees mentioned in the Bible were a fruit-bearing tree, and that another minor prophet in the Old Testament, and I'm sure all of you remember his name because I talked about him before, his name was Amos, and he was a tender of sycamore trees. That was his primary job. He was a farmer and a tender of sycamore trees. The caretakers of sycamore trees were first established by King David. And I'm including this because I think, like I've said before, we need to understand the themes of the Bible and the connections, which are not necessarily made when we read the Bible. You know, when I read the Bible, I don't make any connection between Amos and King David and sycamore trees and what the caretaker of a sycamore tree needs to do, and so I included that in my sermon this morning. So the sycamore tree caretaker is a job that is important, and it required that the caretaker climb up the trees and slit the fruit, the outer skin of the fruit, so that it would ripen. Also, in the reading today, we read about Jericho. And we all know that Jericho was the first city that the Hebrew nation captured after crossing the Jordan River on their way from slavery in Egypt to the Promised Land. Another important city in the history of the Hebrew nation, the first city that was taken over by them, when they were, remember, they were re-entering the Promised Land. Abraham had settled the Promised Land. They were taken into captivity in Egypt later on, and they were returning to the land that was promised to Abraham as a part of his birthright. And from today's reading, we know that, now this is once again, Zacchaeus, in the south we would pronounce it Zacchaeus, and in the north, Zacchaeus is pronounced Zacchaeus. And so it's interesting how language changes from place to place. But we know that Zacchaeus was a short, disliked tax collector. Now I think that Zacchaeus climbed the sycamore tree not because he was faithful, but because he was inquisitive. However, by the time he climbed down and was confronted by Jesus and confessed to him, he had taken the first step in faith. What then do we do to nurture our faith? Sometimes we come to the altar. We read the Bible. We pray together. We gather together in a morning service. And this is why, you know, some people, and Todd has talked about this before, and probably I've talked about it, all of you have talked about it, that, you know, I don't need to find God in a sanctuary. I can go out in the woods and I can worship. I can worship God by myself. But the fact of the matter is that in life, we need to be nurtured by other people. And although trees and leaves and bunny rabbits may be nurturing in their own way, they don't nurture us like other people do. And so we enter into this realm of worship, the sanctuary, so that we can be loved and express our love to other people, so that we can worship together. And finally, follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Amen.